I get it, you're scrolling through endless listings, seeing a sleek metal chassis, a 4K OLED screen that looks like something out of a movie, and a headline that promises desktop-level power in a 2 kilogram package. Then you hit buy now, and a few weeks later, you're the person in the office still fighting with laggy renders or a battery that barely makes it through a morning meeting. That gap between what the picture promises and what you actually feel on your lap is what makes me hit the record button today. I've spent the last few days pulling this machine into my own workflow, reading the specs, and looking at what real pros are saying about similar workstations. If you're on the fence about a high-end laptop that's supposed to replace a desktop workstation, stay tuned. This review is going to save you a lot of guesswork. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the kind of work that pushes a laptop to its limits. I'm talking about 3D artists who need to spin up complex scenes in Blender, data scientists running TensorFlow models, and video editors cutting 4K raw footage while color grading on the fly. For those use cases, you need a CPU that can juggle many threads, a GPU that won't choke on a single frame render, and enough RAM to keep everything in memory. The ThinkPad P1 Gen 7 checks those boxes with a 14th Gen Ultra 9 185H processor and an RTX 3000 ADA GPU with 8 GB of GDDR6. In practice, that means I could open a 12-track DaVinci Resolve project, drag a 4K clip onto the timeline, add a couple of fusion effects, and the playback stayed smooth without having to drop the timeline resolution. When I launched a Blender scene with a couple of 100,000 polygons and a couple of particle systems, the viewport remained interactive, and a final render of a 30-second animation finished in about half the time I'd expect on a comparable laptop from 2 years ago. That performance isn't just theory. In a real-world test, I swapped out a mid-range workstation that had a 12-core Intel i7 and a GTX 1660 Ti. The same Blender file that took me roughly 9 minutes to finish on the old machine wrapped up in just under 5 minutes on the P1. The RTX 3000's ray tracing cores also gave me a noticeable bump when I enabled Cycle's GPU rendering mode. Render times dropped by roughly 30%. If you're the kind of professional who lives in the deadline or die mindset, that kind of time saving translates directly into billable hours. Now, let's look at the display because that's where a lot of people get tripped up. The 16-inch Kuxga OLED panel hits 38402/400 and pushes 400 nits of brightness. In a dim office or a coffee shop, the deep blacks and wide color gamut made the UI feel crisp, and the Dolby Vision support gave me a richer experience when watching HDR content on the side. However, the panel is also an anti-reflection, anti-smudge glass, which means you do need to keep it clean. Fingerprints are more visible than on a matte screen. Also, the 400 nit rating is solid for indoor use, but if you plan to work outdoors in bright sunlight, you'll notice the screen washing out a bit. So, if your workflow is mostly indoors or you have a hooded workspace, the OLED is a massive win. If you need a laptop you can comfortably use on a sunny balcony, you might want to consider a matte IPS panel instead. Battery life is a practical concern that gets overlooked when people focus on raw horsepower. The P1 ships with a 170W power brick, and under a light office load email, web browsing, occasional spreadsheet work, it lasted just under 6 hours. Once you crank up the GPU for a rendering job or the CPU for a heavy compile, you're looking at an hour or less before the charger clicks back in. That's not a defect. It's simply the physics of fitting a desktop-class GPU into a laptop chassis. If you're a digital nomad who expects to power through a full day without a wall outlet, you might be better off with a model that sacrifices some GPU power for longer battery endurance. On the flip side, if you typically work plugged in at a desk, the shorter runtime isn't a deal breaker, especially given how quickly the laptop can get back to full performance after you plug it in. One area where the ThinkPad lineage shines is the keyboard and trackpad. The ThinkPad name still means a tactile, slightly deeper key travel that feels confident when you're typing long scripts or naming layers. The trackpad is larger than many 16-inch laptops, and it supports Windows precision gestures without any lag. I didn't have to wrestle with an overly sensitive touchpad while editing video timelines, which is a subtle but real quality of life boost. The downside here is the keyboard backlight hits a single-zone white light, which can be a bit harsh in dark rooms compared to the multi-zone RGB some gaming laptops offer. It's not a functional problem, just an aesthetic one.